Now for a review of what's making the headlines in the papers this morning, let's bring in a RISE analyst, Dr. Constance Ikoku. Good morning, Dr. Constance.
A very good morning to you, Benga. How are you today?
I'm good. And you?
Very well. And good morning to you, Vimbai. How are you?
Good morning, Dr. Constance. I'm great, thank you. It looks like we're all in one accord with the color scheme today. So that can only mean one thing. We're all counting down to the weekend very soon.
It's a creamy Thursday.
Just a day away from the weekend.
Yes.
All right, it's wonderful to see you guys this morning. Hello there and welcome to the program. These are your headlines. This is the newspaper. MBA Atiku, senior lawyers push for probe. Prosecution of Nnaji over alleged forgery. With reform momentum, it's time to bring gains to people, says the World Bank. And Tinubu inaugurates $400 million Nigeria's first indigenous crude export terminal in Rivers State. Daily Sun, reps reject moves by U.S. to tag Nigeria. Forgery scandal, my resignation, not admission of guilt, Nnaji. New Telegraph, mischaracterization, reps reject U.S. claim of Christian genocide in Nigeria. Army deploys full brigade to rout kidnappers from Kwara State. How Bush, Mbeki, Mandela stopped Obasanjo's third-term bid, Ojekalo. Daily Independent, Broadband, telcos invest $1 billion to drive network expansion. Plan to pull down old MMIA terminal unsettles businesses. Senate summons defense minister, security chiefs over Kwara killings. The Punch, presidency rejects World Bank's poverty report. Nigeria lost $10 billion to Northeast conflict, according to the UN. Opposition slams governors as states IGR soars by 50%. The Guardian, World Bank Nigeria's reforms yielded stability, not relief for poor. 17 LGAs under attack, says Benue Emergency Agency. Leadership newspaper. Girl child education, Nigeria's Naira stability will reduce poverty, Emir Sanusi. Bank of Industry unveils 2 billion Naira single-digit loan for corps members. President signs law creating 48 police academies. Will rebuild a Papa Tinkin port in 48 months, Dantosho. Daily Trust, Tinubu's reforms have not reduced poverty, World Bank. Summits should translate to results, Sultan. 13-year-old boy killed in fresh attack in Plateau. Residents kick as FCT Council resuscitates TV, radio tax. On to international headlines. Daily Express this morning. Our ask stamp duty to help millions buy a house. The Guardian, ministers commit to overhaul of licensing laws in push for growth. Financial Times, collapse of China spying case shows UK can be bullied, says ex-diplomat. Daily Mail, Kemi fires up Tories with pledge to scrap hated stamp duty. The Times newspaper, when did the UK decide that China was not a threat? The Daily Telegraph, case challenges Tama over China, and then the digital ID will be used to access tax records in the UK. Finally, Daily Mirror. What I want most is for Maddie to come back, calling me mom. All right, so let's now settle into this day newspaper. The lead story here is a microscopic analysis of Nigeria's current economic condition by the World Bank. With reform momentum, it's time to bring gains to people, says the World Bank. While there have been efforts to stabilize the economy, it is projected that 139 million Nigerians live in poverty. This is mainly due to all we're already aware of, high food inflation and structural barriers that impede growth. The economy did grow 4.2%, from 4.2% to 4.4%. This was driven by services and non-oil industries, oil production improvements, and agriculture. All these and more were contained in the bank's latest Nigeria Development Update titled Policy to People, Bringing the Reforms Home. Well, we know that these reports from the World Bank are usually just non-binding recommendations and analyses for different countries, and they can serve as tools, economic tools for guidance and strategic partnership between the World Bank and the countries involved. The bottom line here is that there's still deep-rooted inequality in Nigeria and poverty persists. The World Bank cannot help us here. There is much work to be done by the Nigerian government, Vimbai.
Right. You know, the reason why most people like to criticize the Bretton Woods organizations and their recommendations for developing countries is because this is what happens. You see macroeconomic gains, you see capital gains, you see gains with economic growth and so forth. But the question is, does it ever trickle down to the common man? There's several examples of their policies' failure to do so across the world. I always recommend Joseph Stiglitz's book, Globalization and Its Discontent. He's a former exec of the World Bank, and he paints a very vivid picture of how World Bank policies have systematically led to underdevelopment in several countries, not just in Africa and Southeast Asia as well. You have issues with South Korea, Singapore, and Malaysia as well, who then had to reconfigure their economies away from the policy recommendations of the Bretton Woods institutions to try to be able to, create some real development from the grassroots. And out of that, you saw the creation of Samsung, you saw the creation of LG, you saw some of these industries and massive companies being created. So what are we saying? Is that, to me, this is almost like speaking out of both sides of their mouths, because when their policy recommendations come, the criticism is that these policy recommendations do not touch the common man. Now, the presidency has responded, and they've said that they don't feel that the World Bank's measures of poverty are realistic and that they're fair. Well, the World Bank uses the poverty line, which currently sits at $2.15. It used to be $1 around the 1990s, but they've increased it since 2017. How do they come up with this number? They look at a basket of the 15 poorest countries, and they look at what it takes to survive in those countries. The irony is that critics of this approach say that when we're looking at the poverty line, it doesn't even look at a dignified life. It looks at what it takes just to survive. So if you look at $2.15, that translates to about 3,000 naira, give or take. And you ask yourself, how many people in Nigeria are surviving off of 3,000 naira or more? When the presidency did the calculation, this came up to about 100,000 naira per month, which we know is above our minimum wage. So the World Bank is right in their assessment that, in fact, poverty has not been alleviated. However, for me, again, I find it ironic because their policies are the ones that deepen inequality. They benefit those who have high capital, those who are at the top of the food chain, but they don't create enough emphasis on the welfare state. Right. Trickle-down economics has been debunked so many times. It's unfortunate we have to continue going through this cycle where the people feel this pain.
Yes, I was going to say that this is broken record. We have been doing this for so many years, and it comes back to the same analysis, to the same arguments, to the same debate. We have the choice to decide to strike a different path and do something different, is what it is. Let's move on to the second story. Still in this day newspaper, former Minister of Innovation, Science and Technology, Uche Nnaji. NBA Atiku senior lawyers push for prosecution of that former minister over alleged forgery. Sislak wants ex-minister banned from public life or public office for life. There's really a groundswell of opposition against him. I don't know, Nnaji must have many enemies. Have we seen this level of pressure for such cases to be prosecuted in public life in recent times? Nevertheless, there is really that argument that it is not sufficient to resign and be forgiven for your sins. Benga, your take?
Yeah, I think the minister himself, the immediate past minister of Science, Innovation and Technology, Uche Nnaji, himself said the honestness when he came out to say that his resignation is not an admittance of guilt. So that means that the case is still open for trial. I don't think he was trying to play back in the case in any way. I think what he has done is a welcome development by resigning, and that is in line with due process so that the investigation could be very transparent. So for me, I would like to sift politics away from governance, and it resonates a lot of lacuna in our judicial process and in our governance process, because this is a man that submitted a 109-page credentials to both to the secretary of the government, to the government of the federation, I beg your pardon, the Senate president, and also the DSS. So this also, I think if heads will roll, I think more heads should roll to sanitize the process of, because the integrity of the process is what I am concerned about, because if someone had submitted a document and is killed through that process, I think we move away from the culture of impunity, and this take a bow culture is something that must really be frowned at, because if someone is coming to take a role, is coming to join in a pivotal role of leadership to drive the nation's developmental agenda, and it's a critical sector like science, innovation, and technology, I think that the institutions responsible to scrutinize this case must be up and doing, and must be thorough in their scrutiny, so that we could have competent leader and round peg in round holes. But aside from that, you also look at the need for speedy dispensation of justice. A lot of things is really attached to this case, and it will projects Nigeria's image, its integrity, its national integrity in the global arena. So I think this case ought to be taken very seriously, and the process too should be of concern to all the stakeholders in the value chain.
Wingo, I wonder if it is necessary now to begin to scrutinize all those certificates that have already been submitted of all those that are already serving. You know, this is a serious matter. No, it's a serious matter, and it's been happening before in this country. So maybe that should be taken more seriously. There's one more story in this day newspaper. Tinubu inaugurates $400 million Nigeria's first indigenous crude export terminal in Rivers. $5 billion energy bank set to take off. Local players now account for over 30% of oil output. Remarkable development, you know, in Otakipo in Rivers State. This $400 million crude oil export terminal by Green Energy International Limited is the first by a Nigerian company in over 50 years. The president has described this as a significant breakthrough. Lots of activity happening in the oil and gas sector as local players are moving in, possessing larger chunks of the industry bit by bit. Nonetheless, you know, we have to say that despite the enormous, you know, revenues and strategic importance that we get from oil, the oil industry still employs relatively fewer people because it is highly capital intensive and heavily reliant on technology rather than manual labor. So, I mean, its employment base is not much. There isn't direct involvement with people. So we go back to that earlier report of, not enough jobs, poverty in the country. So we have to expand the base of the country. There are efforts towards that. We haven't reached there yet, Vimbai.
Yes, you know, this is a fantastic development for a number of reasons. The first being when the IOC started pulling out, a lot of analysts had spelled doom and gloom for our oil sector. Now, it's incredible to see that local players are stepping in. They're filling the gap. Not only are they filling the gap, but they're actually able to exceed what we saw being done by the IOCs in these spaces before. Now, another exciting development that was announced here is the fact that it looks like the African Energy Bank is almost ready to go. Now, what does this mean? We've seen from the Dangote refinery and the challenges that he faced that this oil, the global oil sector, is a highly, can I use the word cartelized industry. Now, you find that international capital seldom comes to local players. Now, if we're able to create domestic investment for our oil and gas sector, not just in Nigeria, but across the continent, then it means that we've been able able to overcome a massive hurdle to us being able to fully enjoy the benefits of our oil output and our oil resources. So with a capital base of $5 billion and will be headquartered in Nigeria, I think this is a fantastic season for the Nigerian oil and gas sector. And now we sort of just wait with bated breath because we're still not meeting our output targets. Right. So, we're hoping that all of these interventions, these announcements, establishments of, various entities is going to take us finally up to that 2 million barrel per day mark. And then last but not least, the president also made a remark that this is a vote of confidence in Rivers State. After all we saw from Rivers State in the headlines over the past, the past few months, it's a great development to see that there's stability, businesses are investing, and we're going to see a growth in the IGR of that state. And of course, it will translate into a largesse for the Nigerian fiscal as well. What our leaders do with it is what we will now have to ask.
All right, moving on quickly to Daily Sun, to another story. Reps reject moves by U.S. to tag Nigeria. Kick against bill alleging religious killings, country of particular concern designation, while the House of Representatives condemns all forms of violence and prosecution against any person or group. It has rejected this narrative that Nigeria's security crisis is a religious conflict or state-sponsored. When we examine the reactions from this matter, it is understandable in the light of the fact that when you are designated as a country of particular concern by the U.S., it carries serious diplomatic, political, and economic implications. This label is tied to violations of religious freedom, human rights, and can attract sanctions, global disapproval, and even strain bilateral relations. So having said that, are we doing enough, Joe, to make sure that these conflicts that we have internally, we do have them internally? Are we doing enough to make sure that we are tackling them, Gbenga?
I think it resonates the gap in Nigeria's foreign policy instruments. Up till now, we still don't have an envoy to a strategic country like the U.S. That's really
so to any country even.
Yes, but the U.S. are the one making this allegation now. Yes. And I think that we must resist any attempt for the West to foist a narrative on us. And it's because our voice is not heard loudly and clearly enough in the international community. And so the federal government needs to do a lot, because of course we can't deny that there have been pockets of religious killing in the country, but it doesn't suffice. It's not sufficient to label Nigeria as a country that hinders religious freedom. That is absolutely a wrong narrative. So it's time for us to conscientiously and deliberately take intentional step to tell our own story. Like the word of a popular poet, he said, we must begin to own our own story. And how do we do this? It's by sharpening our foreign policy instruments in the international community. I think the federal government needs to start having a rethink in appointing envoys. They are not decorations. They play a strategic role in the country's investment plan, in the country's the foreign image, and many other things that is happening to the country now. Most of the diplomatic blunders are because we don't have a technocrat representing Nigeria at that international level.
Right, very important story in the next paper.
Gbenga, if I may just step in very quickly on that note. Very, very, very quickly on that. Gbenga, I'm not sure how much of a difference having an ambassador will make. We saw what happened with South Africa. Even though they have a fully staffed embassy and consulate in the United States, the president of South Africa even made the trip to go to Washington, D.C. to meet Donald Trump, but they were adamant about their narrative. Now, on the issue of sanctions, I think we need to be very careful with the the manner in which we handle this, because there's a concern that it can also be weaponized politically. Because when you hear some statements being made about, oh, some people went and made this report and so forth, in Zimbabwe you have the National Patriot Act that was introduced some years ago. And this Patriot Act criminalizes people going overseas to go and quote unquote demarket their country. So now, why is this a concern? Because this can easily be politicized and used as a political weapon to hinder people's free speech. That's number one. Number two, I don't think there's enough movement being made around these allegations, because again, same case of Zimbabwe. If you look at the economic collapse that took place under Robert Mugabe, a lot of people feel that actually mistakenly think that it was due to his economic mismanagement. No, it was because the United States slapped sanctions on the country and they crippled the economy. So I think that we need to see more urgency in how this issue is dealt with, because if they do slap sanctions on us, that's a very, very dangerous precedent for our economic progress.
All right.
Yeah, but I think I need to quickly clarify this. I talked about the need for an astute diplomat. When you have an astute diplomat, a competent envoy, an ambassador at that level, he would be able to take care of that, because that's his job. So it's different if the envoy of South Africa is not competent enough. That's a different kettle of fish entirely.
All right.
So what I'm calling for is an astute diplomat that would
the videos
represent
they played
Nigeria
in the Oval
at
Office?
that strategic level.
Okay, we have to rest that to demarcate.
I don't think it'll change
No, that's
anything.
the functional role of an ambassador.
All right.
I'm talking from being an international expert myself.
All right. To demarketing, there will be another piece that would allow us the opportunity to touch on that if we can moderate our comments. Let's see Leadership newspaper. Bank of Industry unveils a very critical story as far as I'm concerned. 2 billion naira single-digit loans for COP members. This is meant to boost entrepreneurship and curb rise in employment. Under this program, serving COP members can access up to 5 million naira each at 9% rate per annum, repayable over 3 years with a 3-month moratorium on both principal and interest. This is another effort aimed at creating jobs, of course, as we can see. What you will find, though, is that many people may lack the skills to run a business, or actually do lack the skills to run a business. Why? Because when you're just coming out of school, you go through theoretical frameworks or theoretical style of education. You don't have what it takes to run a business. So there has been that argument that perhaps we need to have entrepreneurship courses at every level at university, so that when you graduate, you'll be able to create your own job and not look for a job. So as to these loans, yes, you can assess the loans. I don't think that 9%, per annum, 9% interest rate is low. It is actually high. But if you do get the 5 million naira, as a loan to start a business, do you have the skills to run a business competently and profitably? That's a question. So let me put it together with another story so that we can discuss that. There's also New Telegraph here. How Bush Mbeki Mandela stopped Obasanjo's third-term bid, according to Ojekalo, who is a senator. This topic came up in an interview granted by the senator himself, where he narrated the role he played in stopping former President Olusegun Obasanjo, who attempted to secure another term outside of the Constitution, 2 terms of 8 years. Listening to Senator Carlo, the first thing that hit me was the level of foreign involvement in local politics. And again, back to you, Bimbai, the marketing. It shows how local players also go out there to ask foreign players to intervene locally, and how sometimes that might be helpful, that might be useful, but at the same time, it can undermine the sovereignty or an independence of a country. Do you want to say something on that, Vimbai? But it has to be very brief, because we haven't even touched the international headlines.
Okay, very briefly. Dr. Constance, I think this is a heated debate. And it became a heated debate during the saga between South Africa and Donald Trump at the beginning of the year, when there were allegations of genocide against white farmers, because some groups in South Africa were saying that any individual who goes out to quote-unquote demarket the country should be charged with treason. And it goes back to my original point that we have to be very careful, because these things can easily become political weapons in the hands of the wrong people. Now, diplomacy amongst global leaders, I think, is very important. You have friends of a nation. Your Thabo Mbeki, your Nelson Mandela, those are friends of Nigeria. And I think it's just important for us to also highlight, as Benga, my international affairs expert, said, to highlight the importance of those diplomatic relationships and how they can actually actually add value, you know, in a situation of crisis. But the question is, how do we manage these interactions?
All right, I've just been told we have more time, so maybe we can talk about this Bank of Industry loan. Benga, do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between having a loan and really understanding the prevailing realities of our time. Just yesterday, the National Economic Summit Group raised an alarm about the looming job crisis if urgent step, mark my word, urgent step, is not taken to address it. By 2030, 168 million youth risk not having a decent job. And that's when you talk about decent job, it means a job that could take care of your cost of living in the country. And they are recommending that there is a desperate need for 37 million jobs gap to be created to fill that gap. So when you also look at it, and including juxtaposing it with the World Bank report, I was at a conference yesterday where I wonder why the presidency is denying that is also attacking the World Bank, that the figure is not 139 when the coordinating minister of economy and finance minister, Mr. Wale Edun, alluded to that at the summit we covered live. That was the national development update. But I think what is very important is that if the the World Bank accepted, they acknowledged the fact that a lot of efforts have been done in driving the macroeconomic reforms to the point of stability. But what is missing is the point of policy to the people. So the need for the average man on the street to feel the microeconomic gain, and they did make a lot of recommendations that there is a need for structural measures, there is a need to address food inflation, and they need to also embark on more capital projects. So when all of this is brought together, I think there is a way forward in all this. So that would further address the issue of the Bank of Industry giving out its loan.
All right, one more story locally. Delhi Independent this morning, broadband telcos invest $1 billion to drive network expansion. NCC decries fiber cut, equipment theft, access denial. So here, according to this report, this amount is a collective commitment by telcos. It hasn't been invested yet. But, you know, this is an important story because in today's world, as the Minister of Communication noted, it is all about connectivity. Connectivity means economic inclusion. You know, it also means productivity. In today's world, you know, traditional means of doing business, of livelihood is changing. So if people are connected, it means that they have the power to be included in the economy. And in this report, it also talks about, you know, countries like India and Rwanda that are very strong in digital penetration, and Rwanda positioning itself as a hub or as a hub for digital services in Africa. So that's very important. Vimbai, if you want to quickly share your thought on this.
I think what is missing in Nigeria's digital broadband penetration is that of the rural penetration. The last report showed that I think 25% the broadband target of the federal government is 70%, and we've only been able to record 48% in terms of the broadband development plan from 2019 to 2025. So we are still at a far cry. But when you also look at the fact that the consumption of bandwidth in Nigeria, it shows that 3.3 million terabytes was consumed in 3 months. It's rising, and the concentration of this falls in the urban areas. So there's a need for federal government to now have an inclusive broadband policy that would address the rural deficit and strengthen the inclusion policy of the federal government.
And apart from that, Gwenga, there's also the cost. You know,
absolutely.
Yes, even in urban centers, while we are connected, it's very expensive. It's not cheap at all. You know, and you have these new taxes that are coming on. You know, so it limits the amount of connectivity people have, and that's important for an economy that is growing and for an economy that is developing. So much work to be done there as well. We have to go to the international headlines here. We have Financial Times, party pledge, Badenoch vows to shrink state and abolish stamp duty if Tories win election. Kemi, Kemi Bednock playing real politics here to enable conservatives to claw back into power. Question is it enough to give the Tories a strong comeback? And then I don't know if we have Washington Post former FBI Director James Comey pleads not guilty. That story was out yesterday. You also have the hunt for Charlie Kirk's critics spans nearly 300 investigations. And over to France, we know that there's a political crisis there. It's getting worse, and allies of President Emmanuel Macron reportedly turn against him. The former prime ministers, of France have told him very critically that he's not handling the deadlock very well. So a lot going on there. The country seems to be in shambles, at least politically. I think that's all the stories we have on the international front. Vimba, are you back with us? Okay,
yes, I am. Apologies for that technical glitch. To Kemi Bednock, you know what? I know most of us are not very big fans of her, but I'm glad she listened to whoever advised her and told her to focus on the economy as opposed to continue to speak into this brand against migration, immigration, and so forth that she has built for herself.
She hasn't dropped it.
It was a welcome message.
She hasn't dropped it, Vimbai.
She's still talking about
it.
Yes.
But she hasn't dropped it. But she focused, her message yesterday focused on the economy. Which I think was important because I think she's realized that she is losing popularity because of this brand of politics that she's decided to embark on. And the truth is that as much as identity politics is a big issue at the moment, Brits right now care about the economy. How are you going to rescue us out of this, never-ending, increase in cost of living? Where is the respite going to come from? And I think this is also in response to the fact that she's got quite a bit of stiff opposition coming up to her within the party as well. She's starting to face resistance with plans that, possibly they want to do away with her. So for me, I think it was just a breath of fresh air that as much as I may not agree with the policy around stamp duty, I do think that it was a breath of fresh air to see her focus on the economy.
All right, those were your headlines today.
Well, thank you very much, Dr.
All right, Dr. Constance, always such a pleasure.